The Medjay are portrayed as those really cool warriors in movies like The Mummy. But who really were the Medjay? Okay, people today best know the Medjay from movies like the 1999 version of The Mummy. And they're portrayed as being almost these super warriors. But a lot of people are surprised to find out that the Medjay were a real people group within Egypt. And they have a very interesting history. And today we are going to explore this very interesting culture that coexisted right alongside of the ancient Egyptians. Now, the earliest mention we have of the Medjay is in the Old and Middle Kingdoms. And the earliest single mention we have of the Medjay is in the exemption decree of Pepi I, circa 2325 to 2291 BC of Dynasty 6. We also find the Medjay mentioned in the biography of Weni as part of a campaign beyond Upper Egypt. Now, in this campaign, the Medjay were put to task cutting down trees and logs for the Egyptians. By the time of Mentuhotep II in Dynasty 11, the lands of the Medjay were already being annexed by the Egyptians. Amenemhat I, who was the first king of Dynasty 12, campaigned to Kush, where he took some Medjay as slaves, and this is recorded in the instruction of Amenemhat. Up to this point, the Medjay seem to have been little more than Egyptian stereotype. However, this changed with the expansion into Lower Nubia by Senwosret I and Senwosret III. Papyrus UC 32191 from Lehun notes that Medjay participated in the festival of Amenemhat III in his 35th year, and they participated as dancers. We also know that the Medjay worked within the Egyptian fortresses in Lower Nubia from Semna Dispatch number 3 and Papyrus Ramesseum number 18. And what makes this so interesting is that they almost seem to have, even at this early stage, a special status. There was a boundary stela created that Nubians were not allowed to go past. So if you were a Nubian, you were not allowed to travel south beyond this boundary stela. However, the Medjay seem to have been exempted from this stela. So they were treated different already in the Middle Kingdom than their Nubian counterparts. What makes this so interesting is that during the late Middle Kingdom, the Medjay seem to have rebranded themselves as trustworthy servants, guards, and mercenaries for hire. In fact, the 13th dynasty spelling of Medjay has the arm with the stick, which was a determinative that was often used for soldiers. So already in Dynasty 13, their approach seems to have been very different than, say, the other people groups that the Egyptians conquered. You see, with your typical people group that the Egyptians conquered, they would resist, they would fight, they would be suppressed, a new person would arrive on the throne, and then they would rebel. And the cycle continues. The Medjay seem to have had a different approach entirely, which was to say to the king and to the local Egyptian governors, hey, we won't rebel. In fact, we're going to help you out. we're going to be such good citizens that you'll trust us with your fortresses. And that seems to have been what happens, is that they were allowed to be guards for the Egyptians in many of these lower Nubian fortresses. During the Second Intermediate Period, when the Egyptian control of Egypt had contracted to only Thebes, you had Egypt divided between three powers. You had the Hyksos in the north, Thebes in the middle, and the Kingdom of Kush in the south. And the Medjay, at this point, decided to play a very smart game. What they did was they hired themselves as mercenaries to both the Thebans and the Kushites. And the Thebans said to the mercenaries, guard our southern border. And the Kushites said to the Medjay, guard our northern border. So you had both groups of mercenaries guarding the same border. And from what we can tell, when the two groups of Medjay met, they just simply either had dinner together or avoided each other. They ran a scam against both sides, and they didn't get caught. At the end of the Second Intermediate Period during Dynasty 17, the Egyptian army ultimately drove off the Kushites. And at that point, the Medjay became incorporated into the Theban army. And with the Medjay, the Thebans ultimately drove out the Hyksos in the north. But Ahmose I was so impressed by the service that the Medjay offered that he rewarded them. And what became of the Medjay is they were eventually distributed to posts all over Egypt, where they would serve as policemen, guards, and even community leaders. In the famous Israel stela, the Medjay are also mentioned, and I quote, wells are opened for the messenger's use. Bastioned ramparts are becalmed. Sunlight only wakes the watchman. Medjay are stretched out asleep. Now, the idea being conveyed in the Merneptah stela was that Merneptah was so beloved and victorious that his enemies have been suppressed and the entire country is at peace. And there is so much peace that the guards, here in a couplet with the Medjay, can sleep on the job without worry. Now, if a guard was caught sleeping today, that would probably not be such a good thing. But this was an illustration to show how peaceful it was under Merneptah. But the fact is that the Medjay were very, very important to the stability of New Kingdom Egypt. At Deir el-Medina, a Medjay community leader acted as a mediator for the striking workers there. What happened was that the workers were being paid a wage of bread, fish, and wine in order to build the tombs for the nobles and the king. But what happened was the fish and the wine stopped coming. They were still under guard at Deir el-Medina, but now they weren't getting paid what they thought they were being owed. So they went on strike. Now, there's only one small problem with this, and that is that Egypt is a military dictatorship. The Medjay, who were guards and leaders at Deir el-Medina, knew what a military dictatorship does to striking workers, which is it brings the army in and starts breaking skulls. So the leader of the community, the Medjay, didn't want to see anyone hurt. So he told the workers, okay, if you're going to strike on your half day off. That way, the work of the king still gets done. There's no reason for him to come in and hurt you. Nobody has to get hurt in this, and you still get your point across. So, this Medjay moderated the actions of the workers and at the same time was a liaison to the scribes and the local governors who sort of ran the area to get the plights of the workers known. So they provided a very important social lubricant for redress, as well as being general guards and watchmen as well. So that's the story of the Medjay. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt